What can be found in the longest hidden tunnels in the Northeast states? Forgotten relics of the Cold War, the backbone of one of the nation's biggest cities, and engineering advancements that changed the world, just to name a few. Tucked away beneath civilization lies underground worlds that remind us of a time that no longer exists, or secretly keeps the modern world afloat without anyone having any idea. Some have been reclaimed by nature with bats, underground lakes, and massive ice formations, while others remain frozen in time, preserving century-old time capsules that have been sealed off from the public for decades. So today, we're going to be looking at each northeastern state in the U.S. to uncover their longest hidden tunnels, and most importantly, find out what's hiding inside. Our first stop in our journey across the Northeast is Maine, known for its rugged Atlantic coastline, vast wilderness, and its abundant production of lobster. The Pine Tree State is actually unlike many states in that it lacks a famous miles-long railroad tunnel. But what it does have is a maze-like series of military tunnels that sit beneath one of New England's most famous and highly preserved coastal fortresses. We're of course talking about Fort Knox, not to be confused with the iconic United States Army post in Kentucky. This Fort Knox is located in Prospect, Maine, right along the western bank of the Penobscot River, and it's a massive stronghold that has resided over the river since the mid-1800s. While the fort has attracted tourists with its towering ramparts, cannon emplacements, and its stunning views of the Penobscot Narrows, the most interesting part of the fortress's history actually resides completely out of sight. Beneath it lies an intricate maze of corridors, storage rooms, and passageways that once allowed safe passage to soldiers to move about the fort without having to worry about enemy fire. The construction of the fort and its tunnels was enacted in 1844 as a preliminary measure following the War of 1812. Fearing another conflict with Britain, the military saw the Penobscot River as a vulnerable target for attack, considering much of the lumber industry relied on the river for transport. Ironically, an attack never came, but that still didn't stop contractors from creating one of the most sophisticated and dense granite fortresses in the country. Considering how the fort never saw a day of battle, it's left the monument remarkably intact, and that goes for its underground tunnel system as well, giving us one of the most authentic looks at 19th century military engineering you'll find in the country. Fort Knox utilized two primary underground passages, which were known as the Long Alley, or the Counterscarp Gallery, and the Two-Step Alley, or the Scarp Gallery. Together, these interconnected stone tunnels cover several hundred feet of ground right beneath the fort, creating an extensive maze that, luckily for us, is open to the public to experience. As one descends into the tunnels below, sunlight is quickly lost as cool, damp air blows past the thick granite walls. The passageways connect to dozens of rooms that all served a specific, unique purpose. Barracks once housed dozens of soldiers. Supply rooms once held magazines containing thousands of pounds of black powder, readily available in case the fort ever did come under attack. But the layout of these tunnels had a lot more thought put into their layout and design than you may think. For instance, those magazines of gunpowder were held in thick, heavy masonry vaults, covered in thick earthen coverings in the event of an accidental explosion. These rooms worked both ways, as it also would be used to protect the rooms from attacks on the outside, keeping the gunpowder from completely leveling the fort from the inside. The interior of these tunnels are noticeably cooler than the outside air, thanks in part to the ventilation shafts implemented to give those inside the tunnels fresh air to breathe, which also made the walls effortlessly cold, making for the perfect environment for storing explosives. Unlike many abandoned mines or forgotten subway systems that have largely fallen to the wayside by natural environmental decay, Fort Knox's tunnel system has remained in extraordinary condition thanks to how intentionally it was designed. Due to the expert precision used in cutting of the large granite blocks, things like the tunnel's vaulted ceilings have continued to remain structurally sound even after 2 centuries. It really is a remarkable feat of military engineering that never actually got to have its designs put to the test. While it never saw a shot fired at it, the grounds were used as a training post during both the Spanish-American War and World War I. The fort would later be decommissioned, leaving it and its series of winding hallways as an interesting what-if when it came to homeland defense. From the forests and coastline of Maine, our journey heads south, into New Hampshire, where one of the state's most extensive hidden tunnel systems lies beneath the grounds of one of America's oldest and most prestigious boarding schools. At first glance, Phillips Exeter Academy looks exactly as you'd expect from an institution founded in 1781. Historic brick buildings, sprawling lawns, and tree-lined pathways connecting academic halls and dormitories. But beneath those familiar walkways are actually two separate underground tunnel systems, each built for a very different purpose. One was a narrow network of passageways that quietly transported meals between campus buildings, while the other is a much larger 2.5-mile maze of steam and utility tunnels that still keeps the academy running today. Together, they've inspired generations of student legends and transformed the campus into one of New Hampshire's most fascinating hidden underground worlds. The older of the two systems dates back to an era before Phillips Exeter Academy had the large communal dining halls students know today. Throughout much of the early 20th century, many dormitories maintained their own dining rooms, but meals were often prepared in centralized kitchens elsewhere on campus. Getting hot food from one building to another, especially during New Hampshire's harsh winters, was no easy task. Rather than pushing carts through snowstorms or across icy sidewalks several times a day, the Academy built a network of narrow underground food delivery tunnels connecting key buildings. These passages weren't designed for comfort or exploration. Measuring only about 3 to 4 feet in diameter, they were just large enough for workers to crouch while pushing small carts loaded with prepared meals through the underground corridors. Once those carts reached their destination, the meals weren't carried upstairs by hand. Instead, they were loaded into dumbwaiters that lifted the food directly from the basement tunnels into the dormitory kitchens above. It was an elegant solution to a logistical problem that most students probably never even realized existed. While they sat down for breakfast or dinner upstairs, meals had quietly completed part of their journey beneath the campus. By keeping food deliveries underground, the Academy could maintain efficient service regardless of weather, while avoiding the constant traffic of carts crossing busy walkways between buildings. As the campus evolved, however, so did the Academy's dining system. The construction of larger community dining facilities, most notably Elm Street Dining Hall, made the underground food network largely unnecessary, with students gathering to eat in centralized locations rather than individual dormitories. The narrow tunnels gradually fell out of use. Over time, many sections were sealed off, abandoned, or simply forgotten as newer campus infrastructure took their place. Today, very few people ever see these original food passages, and much of what remains survives only in campus records, historical accounts, and word-of-mouth stories passed down between generations of students. Completely separate from those older food tunnels is the underground network that continues to operate beneath Phillips Exeter Academy today. Stretching for approximately 2.5 miles beneath the campus, this modern steam and utility system was never intended to transport people or supplies. Instead, it serves as the Academy's hidden infrastructure, carrying the utilities that allow dozens of buildings to function every day. Fed by a central heating plant located behind the gymnasium, the network distributes steam for heat, along with electrical service, communication lines, water pipes, and other essential infrastructure throughout the campus. More than 90 underground utility vaults connect various sections of the system, giving maintenance crews access to valves, junctions, and equipment without disrupting life above ground. Walking through these maintenance tunnels would feel completely different from navigating the old food passages. Rather than cramped corridors barely wide enough for a cart, the steam tunnels are designed as service spaces where maintenance personnel can inspect equipment and perform repairs. Massive insulated steam pipes dominate the passageways, accompanied by electrical conduits, fiber optic cables, water mains, and control systems running in every direction. The atmosphere is warm, mechanical, and surprisingly loud. Pumps hum continuously, steam occasionally hisses through valves, and metal pipes creak as they expand and contract with changing temperatures. That also explains why access is so tightly controlled. Unlike many abandoned tunnels featured throughout this video, the Phillips Exeter Steam Network remains an active industrial workspace. Temperatures around some of the steam infrastructure can reach nearly 240 degrees Fahrenheit, while high-voltage electrical systems and confined working conditions create significant hazards. A ruptured steam line can release superheated vapor in an instant, making even routine maintenance a job that requires specialized training. Nearly all known access points are locked, secured, or restricted exclusively to authorized personnel. Of course, none of that has stopped the tunnels from becoming one of Phillips Exeter Academy's most enduring legends. In fact, the existence of two different underground systems has probably fueled the mystery even further. Over the decades, stories about hidden entrances, secret passageways, forgotten rooms, and daring late-night expeditions have become a permanent part of campus folklore. The tunnels have appeared in editions of the Exonian, the Academy's student newspaper, with some accounts dating all the way back to the 1950s. As each new class arrives, the stories continue to evolve, mixing documented history with speculation until it's often difficult to determine where fact ends and legend begins. The underground history reflects two completely different chapters of campus life. One network quietly transported meals beneath the school during an era before centralized dining. The other continues to carry the steam, electricity, and utilities that keep the academy functioning every day. One has largely disappeared into history, while the other remains an active piece of infrastructure hidden just below the surface. Together, they reveal that beneath one of New England's most beautiful campuses lies a second, largely unseen world, one that has served students in remarkably different ways for generations, even if most never realize it's there. The vibrant maple syrup-heavy state of Vermont is up next, which houses the largest marble quarry in the world, Danby Quarry. Famous for its durable white marble, the quarry has had a hand in the construction of prominent U.S. monuments like the U.S. Supreme Court building and the Jefferson Memorial. The quarry lies deep in the Dorset Mountain in Danby, Vermont, formed out of a 450 million-year-old geological layer known as the Shelburne Formation. But to reach it, you'll have to descend 1.5 miles deep through an extensive tunnel system. Unlike many of the tunnels we'll visit in this video, this one isn't abandoned, sealed off, or preserved as a historic relic. Every day, enormous trucks disappear into the mountain through its massive entrance, returning loaded with some of the purest marble ever quarried. What began as a simple mining operation more than 170 years ago has evolved into an active underground industrial complex unlike anything else in New England. Marble has been extracted from the hills surrounding Danby since the 1850s, when workers first discovered an exceptionally pure deposit running through the Dorset Mountain. At the time, mining was carried out entirely above ground, where large blocks could be cut directly from exposed rock. But as the decades passed, quarry operators faced a growing problem. The highest quality marble lay much deeper inside the mountain, protected beneath hundreds of feet of solid stone. Rather than continuing to strip away the mountainside, engineers made the ambitious decision to follow the marble itself underground. In 1902, work began on what would become one of the most extraordinary quarry tunnels in North America, allowing miners to access the Shelburne Formation while protecting the valuable stone from weathering and surface damage. Today, that tunnel extends roughly 1.5 miles beneath Dorset Mountain, acting as the quarry's main transportation corridor. But calling it a tunnel almost undersells its scale. In truth, it's closer to an underground highway. The main passage is wide enough for 2 fully loaded 18-wheeler flatbed trucks to pass each other comfortably, a necessity considering the constant movement of equipment and freshly quarried stone. Instead of winding roads climbing the mountainside, heavy industrial vehicles simply drive through the historic entrance and descend directly into the heart of the mountain, where crews extract enormous blocks of marble before hauling them back to the surface for processing. Stepping inside the quarry is like entering another world. The temperature immediately drops, remaining cool and remarkably consistent throughout the year. The air is damp, and water from natural underground springs constantly drips from the ceiling, slowly running down the marble walls before collecting on the floor. Mixed with fine stone dust created during cutting operations, the water forms a layer of pale white mud that coats much of the tunnel network. The lighting is functional rather than dramatic, with overhead fixtures illuminating only the immediate work areas while much of the surrounding quarry fades into darkness. Combined with the echoes of machinery reverberating through the stone, the setting has been described as almost cathedral-like, though instead of hearing an imposing organ, you'll hear the booming roars of industry. The comparison becomes even more fitting as the tunnel opens into the quarry's massive extraction chambers. In some places, the ceilings are relatively low, forcing workers to move through compact service corridors. Then, without warning, the space expands into enormous underground rooms reaching nearly 90 feet high. These vast chambers have been carefully carved from the marble deposit over generations of mining, creating spaces large enough to dwarf even the massive equipment operating inside them. Supporting the mountain overhead are more than 30 enormous square pillars of untouched marble, each roughly 25 feet wide. Rather than removing every ounce of valuable stone, engineers intentionally leave these giant columns in place to bear the tremendous weight of Dorset Mountain above. The result is a series of awe-inspiring halls that feel less like a quarry and more like a hidden marble kingdom from a fantasy novel. Despite the breathtaking surroundings, this is very much a working industrial site. The silence often associated with abandoned tunnels is completely absent here. Instead, the quarry echoes constantly with the deep rumble of diesel engines, the sharp screech of automated diamond-tipped saws slicing through solid marble, and the backup alarms of heavy machinery maneuvering through the tunnels. Specialized forklifts capable of lifting up to 40 tons carefully transport newly cut blocks across the quarry floor, weaving between work crews and transport trucks before positioning the stone for its journey to the surface. Every movement inside the quarry is carefully choreographed, with operators, engineers, and drivers working together to extract massive blocks while preserving both worker safety and the integrity of the remaining marble deposit. The quarry remains one of Vermont's most important industrial operations. Today, it's owned by Vermont Quarries Corporation, a subsidiary of the Italian stone company Red Granite, and production continues around the clock with multiple work shifts operating throughout the day. Each year, approximately 200,000 cubic feet of marble leave the mountain, destined for projects around the world. Danby marble has long been prized for its brilliant white appearance and remarkable durability, making it a favorite for architects and sculptors alike. Some of the stone quarried here has been used in iconic buildings, including portions of New York City's Flatiron Building, where its clean, elegant appearance became part of one of America's most recognizable landmarks. What makes the Danby Quarry so fascinating is that it blurs the line between natural wonder and human engineering. The marble itself formed roughly 450 million years ago, transformed by immense heat and pressure deep within the earth. Yet accessing that ancient stone required more than a century of innovation, from the first above-ground quarrying operations in the 1850s to the construction of a tunnel system capable of supporting modern industrial traffic. Unlike the abandoned rail tunnels, forgotten bunkers, and sealed passageways we'll encounter elsewhere in this video, the Danby Quarry is very much alive. Every day, workers descend into the mountain, heavy trucks navigate its underground highway, and enormous blocks of marble begin their journey to buildings, monuments, and memorials around the world. Hidden beneath the quiet hills of southern Vermont is an active underground landscape unlike any other in the Northeast, a place where geology, engineering, and history continue to intersect deep below the surface. Up next, we enter a pivotal state in America's history that houses Harvard University, MIT, and a feverish sports culture, Massachusetts. It's quite arguably that the Bay State holds one of the most legendary and infamous tunnels in the entire Northeast. Stretching nearly 5 miles underneath the Hoosac Range and Berkshire Mountains, the Hoosac Tunnel remains one of the most ambitious feats of 19th century engineering in the country. Almost 150 years after workers first began breaking through the mountain, the tunnel still remains an active railroad that allows freight trains to traverse a dark underground world that has surprisingly not changed a lot since the Victorian era. But while this tunnel has understandably achieved legendary status, it holds a dark past that has earned it the nickname, the Bloody Pit. The idea for a railroad that would pierce the Hoosac Range first emerged in the early 1800s, when western Massachusetts sought a quicker, more efficient way to reach the ports of Boston. Instead of forcing trains to climb steep grades over the mountains, engineers proposed something that seemed almost impossible at the time, drilling straight through them. Construction officially began in 1851, but progress was painfully slow. Workers initially relied on hand drills, black powder, and sheer physical labor to chip away at the mountain inch by inch. It soon became clear that traditional methods would never finish the project in a reasonable amount of time, prompting engineers to experiment with technologies that had rarely been used on such a massive scale. The Hoosac Tunnel became a testing ground for innovations that would permanently change tunnel construction around the world. It was among the first major projects to use compressed air drilling machines, dramatically increasing the speed at which workers could bore through solid rock. It also became one of the most earliest large-scale engineering projects to rely on nitroglycerin rather than conventional black powder, allowing crews to blast through the mountain far more efficiently. Electric blasting caps were introduced here as well, providing more precise control over explosions and setting new standards for mining and tunneling projects that followed. Many of the techniques first refined inside Hoosac Tunnel would later become common practice on infrastructure projects across the globe. Of course, those breakthroughs came at a terrible cost. Working conditions inside the unfinished tunnel were unimaginably dangerous. Cave-ins, accidental explosions, toxic fumes, and flooding were constant threats. The most infamous disaster occurred in 1867, when an explosion trapped 13 workers inside a central ventilation shaft. Rescue attempts failed, and the shaft eventually flooded, sealing the men deep beneath the mountains. Their bodies weren't recovered until months later. By the time the tunnel finally opened in 1875, more than 2 decades after construction began, roughly 200 workers had lost their lives. That staggering toll earned the project its haunting nickname, the Bloody Pit, a title that has followed it ever since. Yet, despite its violent history, stepping inside the Hoosac Tunnel today reveals something unexpectedly quiet. The tunnel stretches for nearly 5 miles in almost perfect darkness, interrupted only by occasional maintenance lights and the distant glow of approaching locomotives. Much of the interior remains lined with millions of carefully laid bricks, while other sections expose the raw bedrock of the Hoosac Range itself. Water constantly seeps through tiny fractures in the mountain, trickling down the walls and feeding drainage channels that run alongside the tracks. During the winter months, that moisture can freeze near the tunnel entrances, creating spectacular ice formations that cling to the brickwork and transform parts of the tunnel into an underground ice cave, like something out of the Himalayas. One of the tunnel's most impressive hidden features isn't located inside the main bore at all, but above it. Near the midpoint of the mountain stands the central shaft, an enormous ventilation shaft that plunges more than 1,000 feet from the surface down to the tunnel below. During construction, the shaft allowed crews to attack the mountain from additional directions, significantly reducing excavation time. It also provided ventilation, helping remove smoke from blasting and allowing fresh air to reach workers deep underground. Even today, the shaft continues to serve an important role by helping circulate air through the tunnel, although modern ventilation systems have largely replaced the dangerous methods used during construction. Standing above it on the surface, you'd never guess that one of the deepest engineering shafts of its era disappears straight down beneath your feet. Because the tunnel remains an active freight corridor operated by Pan Am Railways, now part of CSX Transportation, it's far from abandoned. Freight trains continue to pass through on a regular basis, carrying everything from automobiles to consumer goods between eastern Massachusetts and destinations farther west. Watching a train enter the tunnel is an unforgettable sight. Within moments, the locomotive vanishes completely into darkness, its headlights swallowed by the mountain before the echo of steel wheels gradually fades into the distance. Several minutes later, the train finally emerges from the opposite side, having traveled nearly 5 miles entirely underground. Even after a century and a half of continuous use, the tunnel still demands constant maintenance. Crews regularly inspect the brick lining, drainage systems, communication cables, and track infrastructure hidden beneath the mountain. Water infiltration remains a perpetual challenge as the surrounding rock naturally channels groundwater into the passage. Modern monitoring equipment helps detect movement within the mountain and identify any areas requiring repair before they become serious structural problems. It's a reminder that while the tunnel may feel timeless, keeping a 19th century engineering marvel operational in the 21st century requires an enormous amount of unseen work. The Hoosac Tunnel has also earned a supernatural reputation beyond the railroad industry. Its immense scale, dark interior, and tragic history have inspired countless ghost stories, paranormal investigations, and local legends. Some visitors claim to hear unexplained voices echoing through the mountain, while others report strange lights or mysterious sounds deep within the tunnel. Whether there's any truth to those stories is impossible to say, but they speak to the atmosphere the tunnel creates. Few places combine such extraordinary engineering, natural geology, and human history in quite the same way. More than any other tunnel in New England, the Hoosac Tunnel represents the determination and sacrifice required to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. It transformed transportation across Massachusetts, pioneered technologies that reshaped engineering around the world, and continues to serve as a vital freight route nearly 150 years after its completion. Hidden beneath the Berkshire Mountains is a passage that isn't frozen in history, but still very much alive, where modern locomotives roll over tracks laid through one of the greatest engineering achievements of the 19th century, while countless travelers pass over the mountains above without ever realizing what happened beneath them. Every freight train that disappears into the Hoosac Tunnel is a reminder that one of America's most remarkable underground worlds is still hard at work, deep inside the heart of Massachusetts. Rhode Island may be the smallest state in the country, but beneath the streets of Providence lies a near 1 mile long underground tunnel, the East Side Railroad Tunnel. This train line once carried thousands of passengers beneath College Hill before quietly slipping into obscurity. Unlike the massive mountain tunnels we've visited so far, this one was built directly beneath a growing city, threading its way under neighborhoods, churches, and university buildings. Today, trains no longer pass through its brick-lined interior. Instead, the tunnel has become an eerie underground time capsule, filled with dripping water, colorful graffiti, and the remnants of a transportation system that disappeared decades ago. The story of the East Side Railroad Tunnel begins in the early 1900s, when Providence was rapidly expanding. College Hill, one of the city's oldest neighborhoods, posed a major obstacle for rail traffic. Its steep slopes made it difficult for trains to travel efficiently between downtown Providence and destinations farther east. Rather than winding tracks around the hill or forcing locomotives to tackle difficult grades, engineers proposed drilling directly through it. Construction began in 1908, and after several years of excavation, the tunnel officially opened in 1910 as part of the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. Measuring just under a mile in length, the tunnel immediately became a vital transportation link. Passenger trains carrying commuters, vacationers, and long-distance travelers pass beneath College Hill every day, providing a faster route through the city. Freight trains also use the line to move goods into and out of Providence's busy industrial districts. Inside the tunnel featured carefully laid brick walls, arched ceilings, drainage channels, and ventilation systems designed to keep the underground passage as dry and safe as possible. At the time, it represented the latest in railroad engineering, allowing trains to pass invisibly beneath one of Providence's busiest neighborhoods without disrupting the streets above. As rail technology evolved, so did the tunnel. During the early 20th century, portions of the line were electrified, making the East Side Tunnel one of the relatively few railroad tunnels in New England to regularly host electric passenger trains. This eliminated many of the smoke problems associated with steam locomotives while allowing trains to move more efficiently through the confined underground space. For decades, the tunnel remained a critical piece of Providence's transportation network, quietly carrying passengers beneath the city, while most residents gave little thought to what lay below their feet. But how could something so pivotal to Providence suddenly fade from existence? Like many railroad corridors across the Northeast, changing travel habits eventually caught up with the tunnel. The rise of automobiles, expanding highways, and declining passenger rail service gradually reduced traffic through the line. By the 1970s, Amtrak had shifted its Maine Northeast corridor route onto a new alignment, bypassing the East Side Tunnel entirely. Without regular passenger service, the tunnel's importance quickly faded. Freight traffic continued for a time, but by 1981 the last train had passed through, ending more than 70 years of continuous railroad operations beneath College Hill. What happened next transformed the tunnel into something entirely different. Once maintenance crews stopped making regular inspections, nature slowly began reclaiming the underground passage. Water seeped through tiny cracks in the tunnel's brick lining, collecting in shallow pools along the floor, and feeding small streams that now trickle through portions of the tunnel year-round. The constant moisture created ideal conditions for moss, algae, and mineral deposits to spread across the walls, giving sections of the tunnel an almost cave-like appearance. The air became cool and humid, while the silence was broken only by dripping water echoing through the long brick corridor. But aside from the moss and overgrowth, something else began to thrive in the tunnel: artists. Today, the East Side Railroad Tunnel has become one of Rhode Island's best-known graffiti galleries. Nearly every available surface is covered with layers upon layers of murals, colorful lettering, intricate designs, and constantly changing artwork created by generations of graffiti artists. Some pieces remain for years, while others are quickly painted over by new artists, creating an ever-evolving underground canvas. Walking through the tunnel is almost like visiting an unconventional art museum, where the exhibits are never permanent. Every trip reveals something different, with fresh artwork appearing alongside faded pieces that hint at decades of creative expression. Of course, graffiti isn't the only thing that now occupies the tunnel. Bats occasionally roost in quieter sections, taking advantage of the stable underground temperatures, while insects and small animals have gradually made parts of the abandoned railroad their home. Rusting brackets that once supported railroad signals still cling to the brick walls, and careful observers can spot remnants of old electrical infrastructure left behind from the tunnel's years of active service. Even after decades of abandonment, subtle reminders of its railroad past remain scattered throughout the darkness. Despite its popularity among urban explorers and photographers, entering the East Side Railroad Tunnel today isn't as easy as it once was. In the early years after its closure, both entrances remained relatively accessible, attracting explorers, graffiti artists, and curious locals. However, concerns over safety, trespassing, and liability eventually led officials to seal many access points. Today, the tunnel is officially closed to the public, with barriers installed at its portals to discourage unauthorized entry. Although, determined explorers have occasionally found ways inside over the years. The tunnel remains off-limits, both because of safety concerns and the deteriorating condition of certain sections. Even so, the tunnel has never completely disappeared from public conversation. Numerous redevelopment proposals have suggested transforming it into everything from a bicycle path and pedestrian greenway to an underground transit corridor once again. Others have imagined converting it into an art space that would preserve both its railroad history and its remarkable collection of graffiti. So far, none of these ideas have come to fruition, leaving the tunnel suspended somewhere between its industrial past and an uncertain future. What makes the East Side Railroad Tunnel so compelling is that it has lived several completely different lives. It began as a cutting-edge transportation project, carrying passengers beneath one of New England's oldest cities. After the train stopped running, it gradually transformed into an accidental underground ecosystem, where water, wildlife, and time reshaped the space. Then, without any official planning, it became one of Rhode Island's largest underground art galleries, filled with murals that continue to evolve year after year. Few abandoned tunnels in the Northeast have undergone such a dramatic transformation. Today, while thousands of cars and pedestrians pass over College Hill every day, very few realize that just below them stretches nearly a mile of forgotten railroad history. Hidden beneath Providence is a tunnel that once represented the future of transportation, but now stands as a fascinating blend of engineering, history, decay, and creativity. It may no longer carry trains, but the East Side Railroad Tunnel carries a fascinating history, one written not just in brick and steel, but in dripping water, layers of paint, and the countless people who have left their mark beneath the streets of Rhode Island. We now arrive in Connecticut, which, like Rhode Island, also harbors a tucked-away rail line that has served as a hidden industrial asset, the Terryville Tunnel, also known as the Pequabuck Tunnel. This hidden line cuts straight through the rocky hills of Litchfield County. The Brick Line Passages has quietly served Connecticut's railroads for more than 175 years. Unlike many of the abandoned tunnels we've explored so far, the Terryville Tunnel has never been forgotten. Trains still rumble through it today, making it one of the oldest continuously operating railroad tunnels in the United States, while passengers speeding overhead on nearby roads rarely give it a second thought. Beneath the hillside lies a remarkably well-preserved piece of 19th century engineering that has survived the steam age, the diesel era, and the modern age as we know it. The tunnel was constructed in 1849 as part of the Hartford, Providence, and Fishkill Railroad, an ambitious project intended to connect Connecticut's manufacturing towns with markets throughout New England and New York. At the time, railroads were transforming the American economy, allowing factories to ship goods farther and faster than ever before. But Western Connecticut presented a challenge. Rather than forcing trains to climb steep grades over the hills surrounding Terryville, engineers chose the far more difficult solution of boring directly through solid rock. It was a bold undertaking for the era, requiring months of drilling, blasting, and masonry work using little more than hand tools, black powder, and an enormous amount of manual labor. When the tunnel finally opened, it measured roughly 700 feet in length and immediately became a critical link in Connecticut's growing railroad network. Its entrance is framed by beautifully crafted stone portals that still stand today, giving the tunnel a distinctly 19th century appearance. Inside, much of the passage is lined with brick masonry laid by hand more than a century and a half ago. More than simple decorations, these bricks help reinforce the surrounding rock, help control water infiltration, and provide a smooth, durable surface capable of withstanding constant vibration from passing trains. The craftsmanship is remarkable, especially considering that every brick had to be transported into the unfinished tunnel and carefully positioned underground long before modern construction equipment existed. Stepping inside the tunnel today would reveal an environment that feels surprisingly timeless. The air is cool and damp, groundwater slowly seeps through tiny cracks in the surrounding rock, drainage channels running alongside the tracks carry the liquid throughout the tunnel. Moisture has stained portions of the brick lining with dark streaks, while mineral deposits have accumulated over decades in areas where water continually drips from the ceiling. Every sound echoes through the confined space. Even a distant locomotive can be heard long before its headlights appear, as the rumble of steel wheels reverberates off the brick walls and grows steadily louder with each passing second. Despite its historic appearance, the Terryville Tunnel remains very much alive. Today, it forms part of the Naugatuck Railroad, operated primarily by the Railroad Museum of New England for both freight service and heritage excursion trains. On select days throughout the year, passengers can actually ride through the tunnel aboard these restored vintage trains, offering a rare opportunity to experience a 19th century railroad tunnel much as travelers would have generations ago. As the train enters the portal, daylight quickly disappears, replaced by the rhythmic sound of wheels crossing the rails and the soft glow of the locomotive's lights reflecting off the tunnel walls. Although the trip lasts only a matter of seconds, it's a striking reminder of how revolutionary railroad travel once felt. Of course, maintaining a tunnel that has remained in service since the 1840s requires constant attention. Water infiltration is an ongoing challenge as Connecticut's seasonal freeze and thaw cycles gradually work moisture into the surrounding rock. Maintenance crews regularly inspect the brick lining for signs of movement, repair drainage systems, and monitor the condition of both the track and the tunnel structure itself. Unlike abandoned tunnels that have been left to decay, the Terryville Tunnel continues to receive the care necessary to keep it functioning safely well into the 21st century. One of the tunnel's most fascinating characteristics is how little its overall appearance has changed. While the locomotives passing through have evolved from coal-burning steam engines to modern diesel-electric power, the tunnel itself remains remarkably similar to the day it first opened. The same brick arches still support the ceiling, The same stone portals still frame the entrances. Even the alignment of the tracks follows the path established by engineers nearly 2 centuries ago. It's an extraordinary example of infrastructure designed so well that it has remained useful across multiple generations of technological change. Like many old railroad tunnels, the Terryville Tunnel has accumulated its share of local folklore over the years. Residents have long shared stories about strange echoes inside the tunnel and the unsettling feeling of standing near its entrance after dark. While most of these tales are simply products of the tunnel's naturally eerie atmosphere, they speak to the way places like this capture people's imaginations. A dark opening carved into a hillside, disappearing into complete darkness before emerging hundreds of feet away, has always inspired curiosity. Even without the ghost stories or urban legends, the tunnel possesses a quiet mystery created by its age, isolation, and continued use. The surrounding landscape only adds to that sense of history. Dense forests now cover the hillsides around the tunnel, making it easy to forget that this was once part of a bustling transportation corridor connecting factories, mills, and communities throughout Connecticut. In the 19th century, freight trains carrying raw materials and manufactured goods passed through daily, fueling the state's rapidly growing industrial economy. Today, while traffic is far lighter than it once was, every train that enters the tunnel follows the same route carved through the hillside by workers in 1849. What makes the Terryville Tunnel especially compelling is that it represents a bridge between the past and the present. Many of the tunnels featured in this video have been abandoned, repurposed, or sealed away from the public view. This one never stopped doing the job it was built to do. Nearly 180 years after the first locomotive rolled through its brick-lined interior, trains still disappear into the darkness before emerging moments later on the other side, just as they always have. Hidden beneath a quiet Connecticut hillside is a tunnel that has outlasted countless railroads, technological revolutions, and generations of travelers. It serves as a reminder that some of America's greatest engineering achievements never fall out of style. As long as there's work to be done, these railroads are going to keep chugging along. There is perhaps no state in America more defined by its underground networks than New York. While New York City's iconic subway system has come to define the travel and culture of the state, the longest underground tunnel in New York doesn't actually transport people, but water. Hidden hundreds of feet beneath mountains, rivers, and small upstate towns is the Delaware Aqueduct, a staggering 85-mile-long tunnel that quietly delivers roughly half of New York City's drinking water every single day. Most of the more than 8 million people who rely on it have no idea it exists. Yet, if this tunnel suddenly stopped working, one of the world's largest cities would face a water crisis within days. It's not only the longest tunnel in New York, but also the continuous longest tunnel in the Western Hemisphere, and one of the greatest engineering achievements ever constructed beneath American soil. The story of the Delaware Aqueduct begins during the early 20th century, when New York City found itself facing an increasingly urgent problem. The city's population was exploding, climbing past 7 million residents by the 1930s. Existing reservoirs and aqueducts that had once seemed more than adequate were rapidly approaching their limits. Engineers had already tapped nearly every practical water source surrounding the city, forcing officials to look much farther away. Their attention eventually turned northwest toward the pristine rivers and mountain streams of the Catskills and the Delaware River Basin, where enormous quantities of clean water flowed through sparsely populated forests. Bringing that water to New York, however, wasn't just an engineering challenge, but a legal one. Diverting water from the Delaware River would affect downstream communities in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, sparking years of political disputes over water rights. The disagreement became so significant that it ultimately reached the United States Supreme Court. After years of negotiations, the court approved New York City's proposal under strict conditions. The city would be allowed to divert water from the basin, but only if it also constructed an extensive system of reservoirs capable of regulating river flow and protecting downstream communities. With the legal battle finally settled, one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in American history could begin. Construction of the Delaware Aqueduct officially started in 1937. Rather than following the landscape above ground, engineers designed the tunnel to cut directly through solid bedrock, deep beneath the Catskill Mountains. Workers blasted their way through hundreds of feet of rock using dynamite and enormous drilling machines, gradually carving out a tunnel large enough to carry an astonishing volume of water entirely by gravity. There would be no giant pumps pushing water towards New York City. Instead, the tunnel's carefully calculated slope would allow water to flow naturally for more than 80 miles, descending only a few feet per mile before eventually reaching the city's distribution system. Once excavated, the tunnel was lined with thick concrete and reinforced with steel, creating an incredibly durable underground pipeline capable of operating continuously for generations. The project was completed in stages between 1942 and 1944, right in the middle of World War II. Even as labor and materials were being diverted toward the war effort, construction pressed forward because officials recognized how vital the aqueduct would become for the city's future. When the Delaware Aqueduct finally entered service, it fundamentally transformed New York City's water supply. Fed by 4 enormous Catskill reservoirs, the tunnel began delivering between 500 and 600 million gallons of exceptionally clean drinking water every single day. Thanks to the remarkable purity of the mountain watershed, much of this water requires far less treatment than supplies used by other major cities, allowing New Yorkers to enjoy some of the highest quality municipal drinking water in the country. Although the aqueduct is hidden far beneath the surface, its scale is difficult to comprehend. Along much of its route, the tunnel lies several hundred feet underground, as it passes beneath mountains, valleys, farmland, and entire communities. One of its most remarkable crossings occurs beneath the Hudson River, where the aqueduct travels through solid bedrock, roughly 600 feet below the riverbed. Above ground, thousands of ships, cars, and commuters across the Hudson every day, completely unaware that an equally important journey is taking place deep below them as millions of gallons of fresh water silently flow toward New York City. For decades, the Delaware Aqueduct operated with little public attention. Water flowed continuously through the tunnel day and night, year after year, becoming one of those rare pieces of infrastructure that people only noticed when something went wrong. Unfortunately, by the early 1990s, engineers discovered that something had. Careful inspections revealed that portions of the aging concrete tunnel had begun developing cracks, particularly where the aqueduct passed through the unstable limestone formations beneath the Hudson Valley. Those fractures were allowing an extraordinary amount of water to escape, an estimated 35 million gallons every single day. The consequences extended far beyond wasted water. The leaks were so severe that they actually changed groundwater conditions in nearby communities. In places like the town of Wawarsing, residents began experiencing mysterious flooding as water escaped the tunnel deep underground before working its way toward the surface. Rising groundwater levels damaged basements, overwhelmed drainage systems, and created problems that puzzled locals until engineers traced the source back to the leaking aqueduct hidden hundreds of feet below. It was a remarkable reminder that even underground infrastructure can dramatically reshape the landscape above it. Repairing the Delaware Aqueduct presented an enormous challenge. Engineers couldn't simply shut it down for a few weeks and replace damaged sections. The tunnel supplies roughly half of New York City's drinking water, making any extended interruption incredibly difficult. Instead, the New York City Department of Environmental Protection developed one of the most ambitious infrastructure repair projects in the nation's history. Rather than attempting to fix the damaged sections directly, engineers decided to build an entirely new bypass tunnel around the worst leaks. The solution was every bit as impressive as the original aqueduct itself. Crews excavated a brand new 2.5-mile-long tunnel approximately 600 feet beneath the Hudson River, connecting it to the structurally sound portions of the original 1940s aqueduct on either side of the damaged area. Once completed, the bypass would permanently reroute water around the leaking section, eliminating the massive losses while allowing the rest of the aqueduct to continue operating as designed. The project carries a price tag of roughly $2 billion, making it one of the largest underground infrastructure rehabilitation efforts ever undertaken in the United States. Even after years of construction, however, the most difficult step still lies ahead. Connecting the new bypass requires engineers to temporarily shut down the entire Delaware Aqueduct, a task that sounds straightforward until you remember what's flowing through it. During the planned shutdown, New York City must rely entirely on its remaining water supply systems, including the Catskill and Crow ducts. In preparation for making the final connection, the Department of Environmental Protection briefly took the aqueduct offline, but nature had other plans. Historic drought conditions reduced water reserves across the region, forcing officials to suspend the project and place the Delaware Aqueduct back into service almost immediately to safeguard the city's drinking water supply. Because of that interruption, the original construction contract was ultimately terminated while engineers developed a new strategy for completing the final connection during a future shutdown. As things currently stand, the bypass is expected to be connected sometime after 2027. What makes the Delaware Aqueduct so extraordinary is that it represents a type of tunnel few people ever think about. It has no trains, no vehicles, no pedestrians, and almost no visitors. Its purpose is simply to move water, quietly, continuously, and almost invisibly. Yet every cup of coffee brewed in Manhattan, every shower taken in Brooklyn, every restaurant kitchen in Queens, and every fountain in Central Park depends, in some small way, on the water flowing through this hidden passage beneath the state. It's a tunnel that most New Yorkers will never see, but one they rely on every single day. Compared to the dramatic railroad tunnels and abandoned passageways scattered throughout the Northeast, the Delaware Aqueduct may seem less glamorous, but in terms of sheer importance, few underground structures can match it. For more than 80 years, it has silently sustained one of the largest cities on Earth, surviving wars, population booms, aging infrastructure, and one of the most complex engineering rescue missions in American history. Hidden deep beneath New York's mountains and rivers is a tunnel that rarely makes headlines. Yet without it, modern New York may very well cease to exist. Crossing the Delaware River into New Jersey, we arrive at one of the state's most overlooked engineering landmarks. Hidden beneath Musconetcong Mountain, between the small communities of Pattonburg and Jugtown, is a tunnel that has quietly shaped rail transportation for nearly 150 years. In fact, there are actually two tunnels here. One is an abandoned relic that once held the title of the longest railroad tunnel in the eastern United States. The other, built just a few feet away half a century later, remains one of the busiest freight corridors in the Northeast. Together, the Musconetcong tunnels tell the story of how changing technology can transform even the greatest engineering achievements into obsolete relics. The story begins in the early 1870s, when anthracite coal was fueling America's Industrial Revolution. To move that valuable resource more efficiently to the coast, the Lehigh Valley Railroad established a subsidiary known as the Easton and Amboy Railroad in 1872. Its goal was to create a direct rail connection across New Jersey to the shipping docks at Perth Amboy, where coal could be loaded onto ships for markets around the world. Standing in the way, however, was the Musconetcong Mountain, a solid ridge of granite that couldn't easily be routed around. Engineers decided the only practical solution was to tunnel straight through it. Work began under the direction of engineer Henry Sturgis Drinker, who would later become president of the Lehigh University. Crews faced both the financial turmoil of the Panic of 1873 and the immense challenge of excavating nearly a mile through solid granite using early pneumatic drills and dynamite, which was still a relatively new technology at the time. Progress was slow, with workers advancing only a few feet after each carefully planned blast, while hauling away thousands of tons of rock by hand. Their efforts paid off on May 28, 1875, when the original Musconetcong Tunnel officially opened. Measuring 4,893 feet long, it immediately became the longest railroad tunnel in the eastern United States. Designed with 2 tracks running side by side, it dramatically improved the movement of coal trains between Pennsylvania and New Jersey's ports, reducing travel times and helping transform the Lehigh Valley Railroad into one of the nation's most important freight carriers. The tunnel also sparked economic growth in nearby communities like Pattenburg and Jutland, where businesses and railroad jobs flourished thanks to the increased traffic moving through the region. Inside, the tunnel represented the best railroad engineering of its era. Stone-lined portals framed each entrance, while carefully constructed drainage systems managed the constant flow of groundwater through the surrounding granite. Steam locomotives thundered through the darkness day and night, filling the confined bore with smoke, steam, and deafening echoes. For decades, it served as one of the railroad's most critical pieces of infrastructure. But as the 20th century progressed, the tunnel began showing its age. Locomotives became larger, freight trains became longer, and traffic volumes continued to increase. Although the tunnel carried 2 tracks, its relatively tight dimensions made it increasingly difficult to accommodate the railroad's growing needs. Rather than attempting the nearly impossible task of widening the existing bore, the Lehigh Valley Railroad chose a far more ambitious solution: build an entirely new tunnel alongside the original. Construction of the replacement began in 1926, only slightly west of the first tunnel. Built by the Bates and Rogers Construction Company at a cost of roughly $3 million, the new tunnel incorporated decades of advances in drilling, blasting, and concrete construction. When it opened in 1928, its massive concrete portals, which still proudly display the year, 1927, announced the arrival of a new generation of railroad engineering. The larger bore immediately replaced the original tunnel as the railroad's primary route through Musconetcong Mountain. The original tunnel lingered in limited service for several years but was permanently abandoned in 1950. Today, it sits hidden on private quarry property, inaccessible to the public. Over time, groundwater has flooded much of the interior, submerging the tracks that once carried thousands of trains through the mountain. What was once considered one of the greatest engineering achievements in the East now survives as a quiet, forgotten relic beneath the hillside. Its successor, however, remains as important as ever. Today, the 1928 Musconetcong Tunnel is owned and operated by Norfolk Southern Railway as part of its busy Lehigh line. Rather than serving passenger trains, it functions as one of the Northeast's most important freight corridors, carrying a constant stream of intermodal containers, automobiles, construction materials, and other cargo between the Port of New York and New Jersey, and major inland distribution hubs like Harrisburg, Chicago, Atlanta, and Kansas City. Every day, products arriving by ship from around the world pass through this hidden tunnel before continuing across the country by rail. Even the newer tunnel eventually needed to adapt to changing technology. Originally built with 2 tracks, it wasn't tall enough to accommodate modern double-stack container trains, which carry shipping containers stacked too high. Instead of excavating the tunnel again, Norfolk Southern completed a clever retrofit in 2002. One of the tracks was removed, and the remaining track was shifted to the exact center of the tunnel, directly beneath the highest point of the concrete arc. That relatively simple change created enough vertical clearance for today's taller freight trains while allowing the tunnel to remain one of the busiest links in the national rail network. The Musconetcong tunnels perfectly illustrate how infrastructure evolves alongside the technology it serves. The original 1875 bore was once celebrated as the longest railroad tunnel in the eastern United States, only to become obsolete as trains outgrew its dimensions. Its replacement solved that problem, yet decades later it too required innovative modifications to meet the demands of modern freight transportation. Today, one tunnel sits flooded and forgotten beneath the mountain, while the other echoes around the clock with locomotives carrying goods to every corner of the country. Hidden beneath a quiet ridge in western New Jersey are two parallel tunnels that tell the story of nearly 150 years of American railroad engineering, one preserved by abandonment, the other by constant adaptation. Finally, we arrive at our last stop on our journey across the Northeast, Pennsylvania, which contains one of the more unusual tunnels in the entirety of this section of the country. Hidden beneath the hills near Hazleton is a passageway that was never built for trains, cars, or even people. Instead, it was designed for one purpose alone: moving water. Known as the Jetto Tunnel, this remarkable underground system stretches roughly 5 miles in its primary section and forms part of a larger network of 6 interconnected drainage tunnels beneath Pennsylvania's eastern middle anthracite field. At the time of its completion, it was celebrated as the largest mine drainage tunnel in the world. Today, however, it has become one of the nation's largest sources of acid mine drainage, serving as a powerful reminder that even history's greatest engineering achievements can leave behind lasting environmental consequences. The story begins during Pennsylvania's anthracite coal boom in the late 19th century. The Hazleton region contained some of the richest coal deposits in the world, but mining companies faced a costly problem. As miners dug deeper underground, enormous water basins continuously flooded the workings. Keeping the mines dry required massive steam-powered pumps operating around the clock, making deep mining increasingly expensive. Mining magnate John Markle believed there was a better solution. Instead of pumping water out of dozens of individual mines, he proposed building one massive gravity-fed drainage tunnel that would collect groundwater and carry it naturally away from the coal fields. Although the concept was simple, the engineering challenge was anything but. Construction began in 1891, with an investment of roughly $1 million, an enormous amount of money for the time. Around 250 hard rock miners worked from opposite ends of the mountain using compressed air drills and approximately 170 tons of forsyte, a powerful Belgian gel dynamite, to blast through solid rock. Every foot required careful surveying because the two crews had to meet precisely in the middle after tunneling for miles underground. Their calculations proved remarkably accurate. On September 15, 1894, the two headings finally connected with their tunnel floors, aligning at nearly the exact same elevation, an extraordinary feat considering the surveying equipment available in the 1890s. When the Jetto Tunnel officially opened on February 11, 1895, it was hailed as the largest mine drainage tunnel in the world. Unlike the railroad tunnels featured elsewhere in this video, the Jetto Tunnel was never intended for transportation. Its only purpose was to drain water from the mines. The tunnel collected groundwater from 4 major coal basins: Big Black Creek, Little Black Creek, Cross Creek, and Hazleton, covering more than 32 square miles of mining operations. Thanks to its gentle downhill slope, gravity carried millions of gallons of water out of the mines and into Little Nescopec Creek without the need for expensive pumping equipment. The system worked so well that it continued expanding through 1934, with additional tunnels linking newly developed mining districts into the growing drainage network. For decades, the Jetto Tunnel quietly kept some of Pennsylvania's richest anthracite mines dry enough to operate, allowing companies to extract coal that otherwise would have remained underwater. By the 1950s, however, the anthracite industry had entered a steep decline. Mines closed throughout the region, and by 1955, the Jetto Tunnel had essentially outlived the purpose for which it had been built. Yet, unlike an abandoned railroad tunnel, the Jetto Tunnel never truly stopped operating. Groundwater continues flowing through the abandoned mine workings just as it did more than a century ago. Today, the tunnel discharges an astonishing 30,000 to 40,000 gallons of water every minute. More than 44 million gallons every day. During periods of heavy rain, that flow can exceed 100,000 gallons per minute. The difference is that the water now carries a toxic legacy. As rainwater seeps through abandoned mines and exposed rocks, it reacts with sulfur-bearing minerals to form sulfuric acid. That acidic water dissolves metals such as aluminum, iron, and manganese before emerging from the tunnel and flowing into Little Nescopec Creek. The environmental impact has been devastating, as every day the tunnel releases roughly 90,000 pounds of acidic pollution into the watershed. It contributes more than 56% of all the aluminum entering the entire Susquehanna River system. While the highly acidic discharge has eliminated most aquatic life from Little Nescopec Creek, what was once an engineering solution for the coal industry has become one of Pennsylvania's largest and longest-running environmental challenges. For decades, experts considered cleaning up the tunnel too expensive to realistically attempt. Treating tens of millions of gallons of contaminated water every day would require an enormous treatment facility operating continuously for years. As a result, the pollution continued largely unchecked. But that is finally beginning to change. Recent federal infrastructure funding for abandoned mine reclamation has provided Pennsylvania with hundreds of millions of dollars to address legacy pollution from historic coal mining. Local organizations, including Friends of the Neck, are now working alongside engineers and state agencies to design a large-scale chemical treatment plant at the tunnel's outlet. If completed, the facility would neutralize the acidic water and remove heavy metals before they enter the creek, dramatically improving water quality throughout the watershed. The Jetto Tunnel is unlike any other tunnel in the Northeast. It was never built to move people or freight, but to move water. And more than 130 years later, it is still doing exactly that. Once celebrated as a revolutionary engineering achievement that helped unlock some of the richest coal deposits in America, it now stands as a reminder that infrastructure can continue shaping the environment long after its original purpose has disappeared. Hidden beneath the hills outside Hazleton, millions of gallons of water still rush through the same underground passage carved in the 1890s, making the Jetto Tunnel both a monument to industrial ingenuity and one of the region's greatest environmental challenges.